Good afternoon from Athens. In its foreign policy, Greece faces a number of uncertainties. The issues seem to be both old and new. How will the European Union move forward? What is the future of the transatlantic relationship? How should Greece respond to instability in the Middle East? And then there's Turkey, seen as taking a number of destabilizing actions in the Eastern Mediterranean. So what's Greece's thinking about these developments? What's the strategy? I'm delighted to welcome this evening Nikos Dendias, Foreign Minister of the Hellenic Republic, and we're going to discuss these issues together. Nikos Dendias has held several ministerial posts in recent years, including being Minister of Defense. He's a trained Supreme Court lawyer, and I'm very pleased to say that he holds a master's degree from the London School of Economics and is therefore one of our most prominent alumni. Welcome, Minister. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here with you tonight.
It's our pleasure indeed. Can I just explain to the audience that tonight's discussion is being recorded, and we would hope to make this available as a podcast for download later. You can also send us your comments as we proceed via the Twitter facility, and we suggest you use the hashtag LSE Greece. During the discussion, we invite you to send us your questions simply by using the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen. Please try to make them short and tell us who you are, and perhaps tell us where you're joining us from. I know a number of you will be joining us from many different parts of the world, and that would be good to know. But first, let me invite the Minister to make a few comments to set the frame for the discussion, so that we can then proceed to the conversation and then the Q&A from you, the audience. So, Minister, welcome. I will invite you to say a few words.
Thank you. I will. I'm going to repeat the word a few words, not many words as politicians usually do, which is, well, in the history of our region, where the Mediterranean has been at the center of our old world, more and more actors have emerged. And over the centuries, they aim to project their sea power on the Mediterranean. A country or an empire controlling the seas was in a position to exercise its power over the entire region. Circumstances have changed since. The international law, by creating a legal framework and rules, has immensely contributed in bringing legal clarity concerning the rights and responsibilities of nations on the sea, and so harmony and peace. In the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece, despite an 8-year-old long economic crisis, despite the global and regional political challenges, has shown unexpected resilience. It has always been a reliable ally and partner in the southeastern edge of the North Atlantic security system, a pillar of stability in the region. Greece has managed over the years to find ways of fruitfully cooperating with all but one of its neighbors in Southern Europe, in the Mediterranean, in the Balkans. Turkey, on its side, on the same geographic area, is constructing its own doctrine, without foundations in terms of international law, to fit its narrative of justice and equity. It draws maps, constructs theories to advertise alleged right, and justifies its endlessly provocative behavior. In this lone rider doctrine, Turkey supposedly derived its rights from the assumption that it has the longest coastline and that islands are not entitled to maritime zones other than just territorial waters. Turkey has a rather peculiar, unilateral, and convenient for its goals interpretation of international law and international law of the seas. According to this unfounded theory, only continental coasts matter or have any rights. Islands are ignored. The sovereign rights to exclusive economic zone are disregarded or violated. And this, regardless of the island size, be it small, as Castellorizo, or be it big, as Crete. Greece is threatened with war, casus belli, if it decides to exercise its right according to the UNCLOS, right to extend its territorial waters further than 6 nautical miles, up to 12 nautical miles. One would wonder if Turkey would support the same preposterous theory for islands such as Sicily, Corsica, or I may say even the United Kingdom. Turkey is basing its narrative on the revisionist blue homeland doctrine, disregarding the very nature of the geographic reality of the region. This is a nationalistic, expansionist theory that has worrying analogies to the vital space projections that, as history has proven, were devastating for Europe, for humanity, and if I may say, for the entire world. Unfortunately, it has become an official theory of Ankara, promoted as a sovereign right, supported with power politics and the clear threat of the use of force. Apparently, revisionism as a strategy of reinterpretation of historical facts and as a systematic approach on questioning established treaties and rules, combined with persistent attempts to create fait accompli, is back in our region. Neo-Ottomanism has been on the agenda of the Turkish president for several years already. It is fueling passions at home over a glorious past and grandeur considered as unfairly curtailed on the time by foreign powers. It is cultivating a sense of injustice made to Turkey at Lausanne in 1923 and the need to correct it. That it has conducted to the emergence from the Turkish side of new claims questioning current borders and maritime zone over unfounded rights. A narrative of conquest has emerged and repeatedly manifested during the tenure of the current president's time in Turkey. See, for instance, the official celebrations for the conquest of Constantinople, Istanbul, by the Ottomans almost 6 centuries ago. All the prayers orchestrated as a spectacle during the recent conversion of Hagia Sophia, a monument inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage List, from a museum to a mosque, by a decision of the president himself. This revisionism aims to question and to undermine the established order and the conventional legal framework as laid in the Treaty of Lausanne. Turkey's illegal and provocative activities in Cyprus, the unilateral interventions in internal affairs of Arab countries like Iraq, Syria, and Libya, the provocative behavior in the Eastern Mediterranean, and lately the active involvement in the conflict in South Caucasus, demonstrate in the most conspicuous manner its will to redraw, redefine, and in its words, rectify the injustice supposedly done in Lausanne. Turkey's activities in the broader region, as part of its neo-Ottoman vision to reverse the Lausanne Treaty status quo, jeopardize stability in the entire southeastern Mediterranean. They pose a threat to regional security as they could serve as a stepping stone for the resurgence of extremists and fundamentalists. This is an issue of serious concern for all of us, an issue which the international community as a whole, and in particular countries of the region, should jointly face. Within a few months, Ankara has become a travel agency for jihadists in 3 regional crises: Syria, Libya, and Nagorno-Karabakh in Southern Caucasus. Besides, Ankara has chosen to ignore its own alliance's best interests in the region. It risks causing damage to its southeastern flank, putting even at risk the cohesion of NATO, taking advantage of the void left in the region by the relative decrease of the United States' presence over the last few years. Not to mention Ankara's controversial political affiliations with Moscow. As self-proclaimed protector of faith and Muslims, Turkey has demonstrated time and again its total inability, or rather unwillingness, to unite the Islamic world behind its profoundly divisive rhetoric. On the contrary, Ankara's reckless and aggressive statements and exacerbating divisions among religious confessions and even within the Islamic world. Ironically, from the highly advertised Davutoglu doctrine, strategic depth of 0 problems with neighbors, Turkey has slided to a point of 0 neighbors without problems because of Turkey's aggressiveness. By its practices, Ankara is doing its best to corroborate those who consider that it has become a systemic threat for the West. Despite facing hybrid threats, such as the weaponization of migration flows, as well as the geopolitical challenges described above, Greece remains composed. Greece is always committed to international law and to the principle enshrined in the United Nations Charter, while promoting dialogue and good neighborly relations. At the same time, Greece remains ready to defend its sovereignty and sovereign rights under any circumstances. We seek to promote peace, stability, and prosperity for all peoples in our wider neighborhood. We do so bilaterally, but also through a nexus of trilateral with the participation of Cyprus and multilateral schemes of cooperation in the Balkan area, the Caucasus, the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Middle East. We strive to promote a positive agenda, one that would advance cooperation, development, and prosperity for all. We try to build where others try to destroy. Ladies and gentlemen, we're indeed at crossroads. Global challenges such as pandemics and climate change need international attention, cooperation, and global answers. Revisionism coming back to our continent is an old foe. We have history on our side and lessons learned through cruel experience. In respecting our principles, promoting our values, freedom, justice, democracy, rule of law, we have created an area of peace and stability in our continent. Greece has proven that by signing in the last few months 3 agreements with its neighbors. Let us brush aside dangerous practices of the past and build through these guiding principles a peaceful neighborhood and, if I may say, a safer world. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, very much indeed. Perhaps we can start our conversation then with your focus on Turkey. You've made a number of very strong statements here, and also I think at the Thessaloniki conference today as well. You mentioned that Turkey is a, quote, jihadist travel agency for Europe and the Mediterranean. Are you implying that Turkey has contributed to a heightened terrorist threat in Europe?
Well, what we're claiming is well established. We all know that Turkey has transferred thousands of jihadists from Syria to Libya. And we also know, beyond doubt, that a substantial number of those jihadists have been transferred from Libya to the Southern Caucasus. And they are fighting now in the Nagorno-Karabakh area. Well, I have to say, this reminds of the old times of the Cold War, when the then Soviet Union was transferring Cubans around Africa to create problems here and there. But I have to say, even at that time, this example had not the terrorist angle, which right now exists, because these jihadists from Syria are very close to Lampedusa, and from Lampedusa, they're very close to Italy, and within the Schengen area and the heart of Europe. So I'm stating the obvious by underlining the dangers created by this practice of Turkey. And I have to say, I have not found one international actor, not even one, that was willing to support this kind of unspeakable activity.
Thank you. You also mentioned about a revisionism in Turkish foreign policy, a neo-Ottomanism, etc. And you talked about a doctrine which seemed to be resonant with the notions of a vital space, which we know from past darker times in European history. But I think also in Thessaloniki, you mentioned that relations with Turkey historically have gone through good periods and bad periods. The crises don't disappear overnight. They're not things which can be changed so quickly. But nevertheless, Turkey shifts its policy from being more accommodating to being more aggressive. Why do you think then in your view, that Turkey has taken on this much more assertive, much more provocative, much more aggressive stance, as you see it, in this period? Why now?
Well, probably I'm not qualified to answer that. This question, I think, should be answered by my colleague and friend, the Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, or even the Turkish president himself. But I have to say, what I'm saying, it's self-evident. And I'm not saying it because I like to say it. Greece would have hoped for a modern, cosmopolitan, tolerant, and affluent Turkey. I think that's what everybody would love to have as a neighbor. Having a revisionist, expansionist power right next door, and if I may be allowed to say, a country much bigger than we are, it's quite a problem for us. So we're not at all happy with it. But on the other hand, we cannot ignore the self-evident. The Mavi Vatan doctrine, the blue homeland, which practically means that Turkey controls almost all of Eastern Mediterranean and half of the Aegean Sea, including the islands, it is there. And we cannot ignore that. The fact that Turkey has a fleet of research vessels that they're going here and there around the area, we cannot ignore it. And if you'll allow me a small remark, which is something that it's quite funny, one should observe the names given to the research vessels. How would you name a research vessel? I take it after the name of a scientist or a Nobel Prize winner or something like that. Well, all the Turkish vessels have the name of conquerors, of pirates. Oruç Reis, the vessels that now is over the Greek continental shelf, is the name of a pirate. And you know what? The name of the auxiliary ship next to it is Yegis Han. Who would name a scientific vessel Yegis Han? I mean, come on. And Barbaros, Kanuni, which is Suleiman the Magnificent, who tried really to conquer the whole Mediterranean. Fatih, which means conqueror, that's the names Turkey likes to give to this research vessel. So they are telling us, and they are telling us loud and clear, that they have changed course. They don't aspire to become anymore a member of the European Union. They don't aspire anymore to become the kind of state we would have loved to see. They're telling us. So unfortunately, as Europeans have to acknowledge what is there.
Do you think this is a long-term transformation, or is it short-term opportunism on the part of Turkey? I noticed very much that in Thessaloniki, you were saying that we've seen this kind of behavior before, and I wonder whether you think Turkey is adopting this behavior for the Erdogan administration, is adopting this much more aggressive stance for opportunistic political reasons, appealing to a nationalist domestic audience, or whether you think this is truly at a crossroads and we're seeing something of a permanent shift or a long-term shift.
Well, let me be frank and open to you. One cannot be absolutely certain, but I'm afraid that we're having more and more evidence of the second. That means a long-term shift versus the first, which is an opportunistic way of addressing issues on short term in order, to win an election, something like that. I would have hoped for the first, but I'm afraid the second. For example, we're having something that we have not seen in the past. We have seen in the past aggressiveness against Greece, but for a limited amount of time. An escalation followed immediately afterwards by a de-escalation, and even intervals with very friendly relations, which I would love to see again in our seas, in our waters, in our area. But right now, what we're seeing, I think, is much larger than what we have seen in the past. We have been in crisis now with Turkey for more than a year. And also, we are seeing Turkey projecting its image as the fatherland for all the Muslim population of the world. That was not there in the past. And all this kind of rhetoric of protection of Islam and of the religion and being enshrined in the Turkish state, that was not there in the past. In the past was a state that had differences with Greece. Fine. Well, not exactly fine, but anyway, manageable. What we're seeing now, I think, is qualitatively different, not only quantitatively different. And again, I would love to be proven wrong.
Not only Greece, but the rest of Europe has been watching developments in the last weeks and months with increasing concern about the threat of military action. How do you think Greece and Europe can avert a military threat from Turkey in the Aegean?
Well, even the very fact that we're talking about it, even the very fact that there's one country in the region which threatens with casus belli, with declaration of war, another country, only while the other country may exercise a legal right, tell us something. That is quite unique. I don't know any other case in the world today that on which we can find a similar example. And let me be again absolutely open to you by saying I consider this as a threat not just to Greece, but to Europe, and not to Europe as a geographic area, but to Europe as an area of principles and values. What is the biggest achievement of the European Union? The biggest achievement is creating peace in an area where there was war every 20 or 30 years. We have not seen a war in Europe now for 70 years, even more. And Turkey is the one case where this is an exception. In the borders of the European Union, we're seeing a threat of war against a member state which has a right to extend its territorial waters, and Turkey says, no, you cannot do that, regardless of international law. That is unacceptable.
Yes. Would you, in fact, broaden it and say that the Erdogan regime, the government, is actually challenging basic European values, not only in terms of law of the sea and international arbitration in that respect, but also that it represents challenges to human rights at home, challenges to freedom of speech. I think this week there were Turkish academics and Turkish citizens who joined a boat to flee Turkey to seek asylum in Europe. Do you think that the Erdogan regime is not only threatening Europe's territorial waters, but is also a challenge to the kind of liberal values that Europe stands for?
Well, thank you for the question. What I said before is that we'd have loved to have an open, democratic, modern, cosmopolitan, tolerant, and affluent neighbor. That's what we would have liked to see for Turkey and the Turkish society. And let me be, again, frank on this. Greeks are not anti-Turks. There's no anti-Turkish sentiment in Greece. We are very close together. We have similar food. I have to say it's very, very easy to communicate with each other. We're people that essentially have learned to live together for centuries, regardless of the problems existing in the region. But what is happening today, you're right to observe that is something that has to do a lot also with an effort to transform the Turkish society itself. Now, the biggest construction project of the Turkish state today is the construction of prisons. In 2016, Turkey had a prison population of just over 50,000. Now has a prison population of substantially over 300,000. So this is a problem for Turkey itself. And we would have loved for Turkey to give the right answer to all those questions. Rule of law, human rights, European values.
It certainly notes the problems of my fellow academics in Turkey who have been removed from their posts or indeed, as you say, imprisoned. But coming back to Europe and the European Union, of course, the challenge from Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean prompts the need for the European Union to respond. And we've seen a European Union which has been cautious, divided, slow in responding. And you have said a couple of weeks ago that for the European Union, the option of it freezing its customs union agreement with Turkey should be on the table. And I can see the logic of that. And in fact, as a European liberal, I think I would am attracted by that proposition. But do you think it's the time for the option not only to be on the table, but for the European Union to act?
Well, unfortunately, I'm a big fan of the European Union, of the European project. I think it's the best project in the history of humanity, but it's a project into process. And we have to understand that it will take time to mature. So facing this challenge, the European Union is indecisive. You have been kind to the European Union with your remarks. It's worse than that. We argue for hours in the Council of Ministers just to create a list of sanctions, not to impose sanctions on a country that threatens a member state with casus belli. So I think the European Union as a mechanism, as a power mechanism, falls short of what it's supposed to be able to deliver. Having said that, Turkey is in clear breach of the customs union. Turkey is openly calling, for example, for boycotting French products. And yet again, we just sit and not say anything, and we allow France to react alone on this. This is unacceptable. Either we're a political entity which should exercise its rights, or we should agree that we are only a family of discussing nations, and in the end of the day, we're just a talk show. Well, I would hate to agree on the second. I would very much hope and work for the first.
As you mentioned, President Macron has been rather more courageous and has offered strong support for Greece in these uncertain times. As President of the European Union, then the German government has been much more cautious. Chancellor Merkel has been seen to put the brakes on, as it were. But I wonder whether this division, this caution, is actually telling Greece something about the potential of the European Union to be an ally to a solution in the Mediterranean. You mentioned the European Union risking becoming a talking shop. If we were in this position in January, or if we had this discussion next summer, and the European Union hadn't actually by then adopted some of the sanctions that you referred to, then shouldn't the rational response for Greece be to conclude that the European Union is irrelevant to the solution?
Well, as I said before, I'm a huge fan of the European experiment. While being a huge fan, I do recognize the limits, but Europe needs time. Europe needs time. And I have to say that the German presidency under Chancellor Merkel was extremely reluctant to go far enough to address the challenge presented by Turkey. I was in Berlin yesterday. I met almost everybody from the German political establishment, the president of parliament, presidents of the committees of parliament, parliamentarians, you name it, apart from the chancellor and my friend, the foreign secretary. But I always remember, I had a discussion with Minister Maas once, and I told him, look, you have the presidency of the European Union, and you should show leadership on this. You're the biggest economic power, you have the presidency, it is your duty. And I had to say, we're both smokers, so we're in a balcony smoking a cigarette. And he told me something that I will always remember in my lifetime when addressing Germany. He told me, look, you're asking us to be leaders, but the word for leader in Germany is Führer, and you understand how problematic that is for us. So unfortunately, on our effort to go forward in Europe, we have also to address the challenges of the past which we are carrying with us. But having said that, this can be no excuse for not giving an adequate response to the Turkish challenge of today. And if you allow me to offer a last remark, we're also doing an injustice to the Turkish society. If we allow the Turkish government to act in an unlawful way without responding, will create the image to the Turkish society of a successful government. Whether this government, the way it acts, it creates a huge problem for Turkey itself. So if Europe really wants to help itself, but also help Turkish society, and also help Turkey to come back to its course of being closer to Europe and really accepting human rights and accepting the rule of law, should provide an adequate response to the challenge presented by the Turkish policies of aggression of today.
Do you think the German hesitation is because of historic fears of leadership, or is it because of today's fears of migrants coming over to Germany, or is it the concerns about the votes of German Turkish voters back home in Germany itself, as it were? So why the hesitation? I wonder whether it is just historic reservations about leadership, or is it seen as a kind of risk of a quid pro quo, that if we adopt a stronger stance in relation to Turkey on the Eastern Mediterranean issues, they may send us too many migrants?
Well, I think it's everything. You're right. I think Germany's leadership is quite scared of a second migratory flow similar to the one they faced in 2015. Although, if I may be allowed to say, they were partly responsible for what happened in 2015. Also, they care for the 3.5 million Turkish origins German citizens. They do care about their votes, and that's quite understandable. I understand that for Germany it's not easy, but on the other hand, what is their choice? Either they're the biggest European economy and a country that has responsibilities exactly or because of its size and its strength, or it's a country that wishes to become absolutely irrelevant. That's their choice. But having the presidency, assuming responsibilities by trying to intervene between Greece and Turkey, but keeping equal distance between somebody who is at fault and somebody who is not at fault, somebody who is a member of the family and somebody who is not a member of the family, and somebody who cares about human rights and somebody who does not care about human rights, that's not leadership in any way. And Germany should decide. And I believe that the biggest part of the German society and the biggest part of the German political establishment is absolutely ready to give the right answer. That's my feeling on Germany.
Thank you. So perhaps there's a note of optimism that something may be moving. The other family relevant here is not only the European Union, but NATO. And I wonder whether the problems in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Turkish stance on these matters, how far you think it's damaging the image, the reputation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization itself? It's not only the European Union. We could have two organizations that look to be indecisive.
Well, Turkey is playing, I have to give them that, Turkey is playing a clever game. When it suits its interest, it's becoming a member of NATO, addressing the challenge supposedly presented by Russia. On the other hand, when the Turkish interests are different, they're going in bed with Russia in the most easy of ways. You can see it happening, for example, in northern Syria. Russian soldiers and Turkish soldiers patrol together. So Turkey is trying to play both cards. They are a member of NATO, but at the same time, they're buying and they're using S-400. So it is for NATO to decide. I have to say NATO rules and NATO DNA had to do a lot with the Cold War. And I understand how difficult it is for NATO to change it, to transform its DNA and address challenges of a completely different era. I have to say much more complex challenges. For example, differences between its own members. That is difficult for NATO. So NATO's indecisiveness, I can understand. I don't mean that I can agree. I'm not saying that I'm accepting it, but I can understand that the DNA transformation of NATO would take a long time. What I would require of NATO is not allow member states, all member states, not just Turkey, to use it as a vehicle of opportunity. When we like it, we're members. Where we don't like it, we cooperate with anybody we would like, even if those interests are against the interests of NATO.
I wonder whether some of the people watching will think that you're suggesting that Turkey is really very good at foreign policy. It can divide and rule. It's presenting the European Union with an almost existential point of reflection as to whether the European Union is relevant or not. It's presenting NATO as a body which is seemingly also unable to act. This seems to be very clever foreign policy, doesn't it?
Well, let us agree that the size and the geographical position of Turkey gives to this country unique advantages. And it's for Turkey to use them for good or for evil. And I'm afraid the second is the truth of the current era. But if you'll allow me to say that in the last few years, going back to the Davutoglu doctrine of no problems on our periphery, now, as we are, Turkey has achieved to unite a huge number of countries, not against it, but on a completely different understanding of what the situation should be. And it is Egypt, it is Israel, it's the Emiratis, it is the Saudis, it's the Greeks, it's the Cypriots, it's the Armenians, it's the Syrians, it's the Iraqis, you name it, the Jordanians, you name it, it's there. So Turkey has achieved to create a lot of problems in the region. And if you allow me to say, although you may achieve short-term advantages, in the end of the day, the quantitative differences make a qualitative difference. So if I was asked, which probably will never be the case, to advise the Turkish government, my advice would have been for a completely different kind of policy.
Thank you. This links, of course, with the world watching today to see who will be the next US president and what kind of US leadership we might have in the Atlantic relationship, NATO in particular. It seems as though the momentum is behind Joe Biden, and we could be, in the next few days, witnessing the success, the victory of Joe Biden as the next president in the White House. What kind of difference for Greece do you think that might make? What would you hope from a President Biden?
Again, let me be clear. Apart from the personal affiliation between of President Trump with President Erdogan, Greece has no problem with the existing American administration. And I have to openly say that Secretary Pompeo was openly advocating for the rule of law in the region, not Greece's rights, but the rule of law and the rule of international law. And that has to be said. On the other hand, we would be greatly satisfied with a more extensive American presence in the area. I have to say the fact that when I was a kid, the sixth American fleet was always present in the region at the times of the Cold War. Now I'm just thinking loudly, but if the Sixth Fleet was still in the Mediterranean, would all its rays been going here and there in this Mediterranean unchallenged? Probably not. So I would welcome the American presence in the region. And no matter if there's a new administration or the present administration continues on, what I would have asked the United States government is to be present in the region. There are many things at stake. NATO's coherence is at stake, and America should be present.
Thank you. Of course, as you say, Secretary Pompeo did indeed issue a joint statement with you in September talking about the maritime delimitation issue should be resolved peacefully in accordance with international law. And that was seen as an unmistakable repudiation of the Turkish stance in the Aegean. And I wonder whether that really is the limit of what Greece could reasonably expect from the White House. You talk about the potential for the United States to deploy its Navy vessels in the Eastern Mediterranean as in the past. France, of course, has been very, very supportive of Greece in this respect. But do you think it's reasonable, it's realistic to expect either President Trump or President Biden from after the election to go the next stage and deploy military equipment, vessels?
Well, I'm not advocating deployment against Turkey. I'm advocating for a presence will secure the rule of law and the rule of international law in the region. And I have to say, if for the world superpower, as the United States, which has certain values enshrined in its constitution, such a presence would not have been something that one would think goes beyond the scope of the existence of the United States. So my answer to you would be yes. Yes, I would ask the next administration, regardless of who the president is, to send military vessels in the region, because that will help safeguard peace in the region. If the Turkish Navy and the Greek Navy are being left alone, and the Turkish Navy goes beyond red lines that exist, then the Greek Navy can only respond, and that could not be to the benefit of NATO. So the American presence would safeguard peace. This is something that would be very welcome from all sides.
Thank you. Perhaps the last theme I would like to move on to before we open up to the many questions I can see coming in from the audience is actually to perhaps put these issues in a wider strategic theme. It strikes me that in recent times you've had a much higher level of diplomatic activity on a wider range of matters. You've mentioned Israel, Egypt, through to the Gulf states, etc. Is this part of a shift in strategic thinking? Is this something new in Greek foreign policy?
Well, Greece's foreign policy has contracted because of the economic crisis. That is true. We came back even from the Balkans, which is our neighborhood. It's only natural and expected from us to go back. And go back in what sense? We're not in any way a big country. We're not an imperialist force. We're a medium-sized country, member of the European Union, but I think we have something concrete to offer. And what we do try to create in our overall region is understandings based on international law. And that's the basis for our cooperation in the Balkans. We have a huge interest in helping the Western Balkans in their accession process towards the European Union. That is our strategic interest, but I think that is also the strategic interest of Europe. We would like to build a solid relation with Israel. We have built a solid relation with the Arab world, and we would like also to create a solid relation with the Gulf states, with the United Arab Emirates, with Saudi Arabia, if you will allow me to become over ambitious, even with India. The Indian foreign minister is coming to Athens in the end of November after 18 years, and we would like to bring India, an emerging superpower in the Mediterranean, not just for military reasons, but in order to create understandings and achieve cooperation, which I think would create prosperity for all the countries involved. And of course, we would love to have Turkey as a member of such an understanding. And it's for Turkey to decide, because as things go forward, Turkey is more and more becoming the minority of one, and we don't like that. We would love, as I said before, and I will not stop repeating, an affluent, modern, cosmopolitan, tolerant, and cooperative Turkey.
Thank you. I wonder, though, whether you would feel that the foreign policy of Greece today is responding to events, or whether you would feel that the foreign policy of your government is somehow different from that of its predecessor, the Syriza government, the governments led by Alexis Tsipras, whether there's a shift of values, norms, or whether it's simply a response to new events?
Well, I would have lied if I wouldn't have admitted that the foreign policy of any country is responding to events. But that's only an element of it. It's absolutely necessary. You cannot ignore what's happening next to you. Then that would not have become a policy. It may have become a philosophy or something else, but not a policy. Of course, you have to address issues that appear next to you, and we're doing that. But at the same time, we have a strategy, which is a long-term strategy, at least for Greece half a century. And the main element of that strategy, to give you one example, is to resolve our differences over the limitation of sea zones with our neighbors. And we have done that with all our neighbors, again, with the exception of one. We have achieved an agreement with Italy, we have achieved an agreement with Egypt, which are achieved how we will resolve our disagreement with Albania. So Greece is becoming a model state. We are resolving, according to the rules of international law, any kind of difference we have with all our neighbors. Again, unfortunately, with the exception of one. So this is Greece's foreign policy, a long-term strategy based on rules and on values. And of course, trying to create a prosperity and stability for all.
Thank you. Let me then switch, if I may, Minister, to some of the questions which have come in from the audience. And this is where it gets a little bit more tricky for me to select the questions which come on my screen. But I can start perhaps with a question which comes from Nikos Dendias from Memphis in the United States. He writes, what is Greece prepared to do about Turkish provocations if the EU refuses, deadlocks, or simply cannot impose sanctions or some type of robust response? What would Greece do if the EU doesn't act?
Well, the answer is simple. Greece has stood alone in the region even before the emergence of the existence of the European Union, and I hope it won't come to that, but it can do that even today. We have one obligation to defend our constitutional rights, our territory, our sovereignty, our sovereign rights. This is our obligation, and this is what we're going to do. But I'm sure that our partners, our friends in the European Union will not let that happen. But if it does, again, we can stand alone. That has been always the way we're dealing with reality.
Thank you. This leads perhaps to a very specific maritime issue question, which comes from Dimitris Maniudis. Ask, why doesn't Greece affirm its rights to the 12-mile territorial limit?
No, we're doing exactly that. We're starting, the Greece's doctrine is when we have an agreement with the opposite country, on the neighborhood country, we proceed in extending our territorial waters. So now in the Ionian Sea that we have signed agreements with Italy and we have resolved the difference with Albania, we're expanding our territorial waters. And that we will follow that by expanding our territorial waters to Crete after we had an agreement with Egypt. And we hope sincerely that we will be able to achieve such an agreement with Turkey in the near future. But yet again, the right to extend the territorial waters remains the right of the Hellenic Republic. Just we choose the time, but the right is always there.
Why isn't the time today?
Well, this is a political calculation. We would have preferred to do it after we had an agreement with Turkey, but we always reserve the right to do it whenever we think fit.
Thank you. There's a question coming from Turkey, Emre Metin Bellinger. He says, two idealist ministers from both sides, Ismail Cem and Yorgos Papandreou, managed to build a dialogue between the two countries in the 1990s. Can this be achieved with your Turkish counterpart today? There's also a question from Richard Schwartz. Are there any past or present examples of bilateral cooperation that you feel could serve as a model for de-escalating the crisis with Turkey?
The answer would be of course. And I have always said openly that I consider Mevlut Çavuşoğlu a friend of mine. We have been together in the Council of Europe for years in the same committee. He was chairman of the Migration Committee. If I remember well, I was vice chair of that committee and became chairman afterwards when he became president of the Assembly, the Parliamentary Assembly. So of course we can. And I know Mevlut, and I know Mevlut in his heart believes to European values. But it's the choices of the Turkish government that have to follow that pattern. And we would love to follow examples of cooperation and understanding of the past. That's exactly what we hope for, that's what we are trying. And I have to say the differences we have with Turkey are not differences that cannot be resolved. Rather the opposite. Kemal Atatürk and Eleftherios Venizelos in the 20s were able to resolve differences far bigger, far larger, concerning populations, land, than right now. The only difference we have has to do with the limitation of sea zones. So with a willing neighbor, these differences can be resolved. And we manifested that with our agreements with Egypt, Italy, and Albania. So absolutely, I would be willing to follow that example. And I have to say, if I would like to find an example of the past, it's the earthquake diplomacy, how they helped us and how we helped Turkey during our hour of need in the big earthquakes that have hit both countries. But again, unfortunately, I have hoped even for exactly the replica of that after the earthquakes just a few days ago. But the truth is, Turkey sent Observatory again the next day in the southeastern Mediterranean. They didn't allow the opportunity. So that's where we are.
Thank you for that. This is from Stefanos Kalivas. You recently visited the Kurdish region of Iraq. Are we to expect a greater involvement of Greece in developments in the Middle East and the Caucasus region to counter Turkey's influence?
Well, we're not. The truth is, I didn't manage to go because I had a problem with my plane. And I was to fly from Baghdad to Erbil, but I couldn't. And I have to say I faced another problem because Turkey kept my plane in the air for almost half an hour before allowing us to pass through Turkey. But okay, that was an unfortunate incident. But the truth is, we're not present in the Middle East because we want to create problems for Turkey, or because Turkey is there, or because we would like to address Turkey's interest in the region. We are in the Middle East because it's our own interest to be in the Middle East. It's our neighborhood. We would like to project our values, and we would like to safeguard our interests in the region. So that is why we're there. We're not doing something because Turkey did the opposite or something similar. We'll stand on our own, and we would love to have a cooperative Turkey in this process. Turkey is a part of our region, will not go away. We cannot change Turkey with Luxembourg, but Luxembourg here. We will always have Turkey. So we will have eventually to work with Turkey, but Turkey has to give us space for that.
Thank you. If I may, I'm going to try to group several questions here, just in the interest of time. And they do specifically refer to the hydrocarbon reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean and the energy sources. There's a question about the hydrocarbon reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean. Do they actually have real economic value, or have they become simply a political object?
Well, I very much share the rationale behind the question. Let us be again frank. The level of prices of oil and gas in the international market now does not support the narrative of digging 4,000 meters under the sea to extract oil or gas. And also for us, for the Mitsotakis government, I won't bring news to you by saying that we would prefer the Aegean to be the paradise it is today. We're not planning to turn it to a Gulf of Mexico. So we very much doubt if there's any gas under the Aegean, but even if it was, I'm not sure our choice would have been to extract it. Having said that, I'm afraid that for Turkey, the narrative is different. Turkey is using the hydrocarbons as an issue for internal consumption in trying to address the grievances of the Turks because of the deteriorating economy. But at the same time, what is in the mind of the leadership is a geopolitical pattern. I'm sure they make the same calculations that we make, and they do not think that it would be greatly profitable to start digging under 4,000 meters. So in my humble opinion, it's geopolitical. It's not a hydrocarbon sort of question.
Thank you. There's another question from Turkey. Should the energy resources in the Eastern Mediterranean be shared equally with Turkey and the Turkish Cypriots?
Well, I think that's, I suppose that question has to do with Cyprus. So Nikos Christodoulides would have been the minister responsible to answer it. But having been present in a number of councils, I have heard with my own ears President Anastasiadis and Minister Christodoulides saying openly and clearly that, of course, the Turkish Cypriots are entitled to a part of the wealth that exists in the exclusive economic zones of the Turkish Republic. But I don't think the right way to give that to the Turkish Cypriots is to send Turkish tips to start drilling in the exclusive economic zones of Cyprus. I don't think that's the way to address it.
Thank you. Another question. Turkey backs its policy with an active presence on the web and social media. For example, TRT News is available even in the Greek language. And there's an active presence on Twitter, etc. Are there plans in the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs to develop a similarly much more active public diplomacy?
Oh, we will be trying to do that. I have to say, we have not, well, let me be honest. As always, somebody who feels is right and defends values that are considered self-evident, as human rights, rule of law, international law of the sea, well, is not very active in a propaganda machine. Probably we will have to be more active, not in creating a propaganda machine. We should never do that, but in addressing questions that exist in the international media over something that sometimes may seem too complex from far away. So we're going to address this issue. And thank you for asking the question.
Thank you. I'm going to try to link two questions here. They have to do with how Greece might approach the European Union. Alexandros Papadopoulos asks, should Greece use Article 47.2 of the Treaty on the European Union, which refers to a mutual defense clause, as leverage in the sanctions asked from the European Union? And similarly, there's a question here from Irini Papanikolaou, which says, recently you stated that it's unacceptable for members of the European Union to continue to provide Turkey with military equipment when this very country seems to threaten members of the Union like Greece and Cyprus. Would you care to comment? I guess what links the two questions is whether Greece could actually be more active in getting EU action by, for example, activating the relevant clause of the Treaty of European Union for mutual defense, and perhaps in terms of its public diplomacy, highlighting the contradiction between EU governments asking for Turkey's restraint while still providing it with armaments. That seems to be rather like me approaching a drunk in the park and saying, would you like another drink?
Well, as far as 47 paragraph 2 is concerned, we have made clear to our European friends and partners that we are going to ask for its implementation if there is Turkey's aggression at a higher level than we see today. And I have sent a relevant letter to Commissioner Borrell on this, to the High Representative. This is a right existing for all European countries, and Greece is going to use it if things arrive to that level, which I hope they won't. Now, on the issue of weapons, this is one of the main reasons I was in Berlin yesterday, to say openly to the Germans, to our German friends, that exporting arms to Turkey, and especially exporting attack submarines to Turkey, would be something that's completely unacceptable. Because when you have agreed to do that back in 2009, Turkey was a different Turkey. Now, Turkey is threatening war upon us against us exercising a legal right. You cannot do that. And I have to say, I met some sort of sympathetic behavior from the German side, although for them, economically, that would be quite detrimental. But there's one example I would like to mention, if you will allow me, and this is Canada. Canada has stopped, without us asking, Canada has stopped exporting cameras to Turkey because Turkey is using the cameras for its drones. And the Turkish drones are active in war theaters in Libya, in Nagorno-Karabakh, and in Syria. So without even being asked, we didn't know that Canada is exporting cameras to Turkey to be used to the drones. Can Canada, a principled country, stop this export? I think Canada makes a great example for us Europeans. And of course, I have to underline what's already known. Canada is not a member of the European Union.
Speaking of another country which isn't a member of the European Union, the United Kingdom, I imagine our mutual friend, John Kittmer, who used to serve in Athens, asks the question, what expectations do you have of British foreign and defense policy in the Eastern Mediterranean in the era of Brexit? Sorry, he also adds to that, if I may, Minister, would you welcome heightened bilateral activity, or is it via NATO, where it would be the only means by which you would expect the UK to be involved?
Not at all. Not at all. I'm very, as you know, I'm a friend of John's for years now, and I have always to say kind words for his presence in Greece and his great efforts to enhance our relation with the United Kingdom. John has been a successful ambassador, and I have to say a great user of the Greek language. Having said that, our position is clear. We would have loved United Kingdom involvement in the region, but unfortunately that seems not to be the choice of the United Kingdom. I have gone even out of my way to ask for a clear position of the United Kingdom on what's happening in our seas. And the response was always, as a matter of principle, the United Kingdom is not getting involved in that sort of situation, does not openly state its position. And please take into account the position I was asking for is a position based on the international law, international laws of the sea. So the only thing I was asking the United Kingdom to say is that we support international law, international laws of the sea. So even that was never said. So as much as I welcome the United Kingdom presence and the United Kingdom's clear position, we're not getting it. Of course, this is for the British government to decide. It's not for me, but that's where we are.
There seem to be historical parallels here. When Greece faces a foreign policy crisis, Britain fails to act. The EU doesn't come to its support, and there's uncertainty in Washington. Let me, if I may, just pass to another great Phil Hellene and a British politician, Andrew Dismore, asks, now shifting the focus, now that the North Macedonia issue is resolved, what opportunities for Greece are there in the Balkans, and what role will Greece play in its own right and as a member of the European Union vis-a-vis the rest of the Balkans?
This is a very interesting question. It follows on the Thessaloniki agenda.
Yes.
We are very proud indeed, that we were able to facilitate our neighbors, Romania and Bulgaria, to become members of the European Union. And our task now is to help the Western Balkans in their European effort, in the effort to become members of the European Union. It would be a grave mistake if we allow the Western Balkans to become a black hole in the center of Europe. So Greece sees its duty to help those countries and also to export to those countries the know-how in order to be able to join the Union. Create institutions. Institution building is of paramount importance in the Balkans. That is mainly what is needed. Proper institutions will fight corruption, will help the economy, will help societies, will guarantee the rule of law and human rights. And that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to help North Macedonia, we're trying to help Albania. We will do the same in Kosovo, we'll do the same in Bosnia-Herzegovina. That's the task that is before us, and I think we will do our best.
Thank you. I'm conscious, Minister, that we're asking you questions right across the range and asking you to jump from one topic to another. But if you will indulge us further, we have two questions which relate to the relations between Greece and Israel. One is to say, how and in what ways is the alliance with Israel important to Greece in minimizing Turkish provocations? A second question, which is from Ruth Daskalopoulou from the European Jewish Association. Can the minister speak of the importance of Greek-Israel cooperation as it relates to the new geopolitical alliances in the region, please?
Well, I will answer clearly on this. We don't see our relations with many countries and our relation with Israel as an axis against Turkey. We don't view our relations under that angle. I think we are friends of Israel, and this friendship and this cooperation and this strategic relation, because it has come in a very few years up to that level, has its own merits. And it's very useful for the Israelis, and yes, very useful for us. They have a lot to gain, and we have a lot to gain. Of course, we have, as I said before, common understandings on various issues, on security, on stability in the region. And because Turkey does not accept that sort of values and does not accept that sort of rules, it seems as this relation is something that's against Turkey, which is not. We would welcome Turkey, for example, in a trilateral with Greece and Israel, provided that Turkey accepts the same rules that Greece and Israel accepts. But having said that, there is a huge potential in our cooperation with Israel. I think we have only realized something like 20 or 30% of that cooperation. You name it, it's there. On new technologies, on education, on energy, whatever you can think of, it's a field on which our cooperation in Israel could be mutually profitable. And I have to say, it's a great opportunity. And also the fact that Israel has signed the Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates gives to this relation with Israel an additional potential, because we're also a friend of the Emiratis. And may I be open to you, we were at a difficult position in the past. This makes our life a lot easier. And we also would like to achieve a solution in the issue of Palestine, because this is a problem in our region. We would like to help him, if we can, to address that problem as well. We see huge number of opportunities in our region.
Thank you. It's an evening to bring together a number of well-known Philhellenes. Robert MacDonald, a highly regarded British journalist who knows Greece very well for many years, asks a simple question. You refer to the blue homeland policy of Turkey. Is that a policy of Turkey, he asks, or simply a policy of the Erdogan administration?
Well, it is certainly the policy of the later, of the current administration.
Yes.
But as in many other issues, I'm afraid that as time passes by, that will shape also the Turkish establishment. And that will change the attitude of the Turkish establishment, the political establishment in the future. So when I first heard this phrase of the blue homeland, I have a small map, by the way, right next to me. It is this one. You can see it includes half of the Aegean and a huge number of Greek islands. And because one may think that this is a propaganda element, I have another picture with President Erdogan speaking in front of the blue homeland picture. So as time passes by, this has become a part of the official position of the Turkish establishment, regardless of who is in the presidency, who is in the foreign ministry. I think that, so for the current time, it's something that may, when I first heard of it, I said, well, that's a crazy idea of some sort of, low-level officer in the Navy. But as time passes by, it's become more and more an official Turkish position. And in the future, I'm afraid that would become a doctrine for the Turkish foreign policy, which will not be good even for Turkey.
There's a question picking up your reference to the process begun with Albania, and in relation to Albania, the reference to the arbitration via the International Court of Justice. And how far do you think that might impact on relations with Turkey? To what extent might not only Greece, but Europe see that process as being one to be replicated in relation to Turkey?
Well, this is a very interesting question, because I have thought of that angle as well. And although I would have welcomed to arrive into an agreement immediately with Albania, having reached an agreement to go to The Hague serves as an example. And it could have been a perfect example for Turkey, because the situation is quite similar. There are Greek islands opposite the Albanian coastline. There are even small Greek islands. I'm coming from Corfu. There are 3 islands in north of Corfu, Othoni, Erikusa, and Matraki. So similar legal issues have to be addressed there as well. And I have to say, the Albanian government, Prime Minister Rama, but also the Albanian opposition and the Albanian president had the courage to say, yes, we're going to international court. And yes, terms of reference in the international court, The Hague, is the international law of the sea. So if Turkey would just replicate the example of Albania, would be great.
Thank you. Athanasios Vasilas asks, Dear Minister, with respect to the exploratory talks, when will they take place? And if they did take place, what would the ideal outcome be?
Well, when, unfortunately, I cannot answer. Last time I met my friend Mavlut Çavuşoğlu in Bratislava, I was promised a date, and after 2 days, Turkey sent us all its race. So really, I have no idea. The only thing Greece has openly said again and again, and Prime Minister Mitsotakis has repeated it endless times in the Council, was that we are ready to talk, provided that Turkey stops what it's doing now over the Greek continental shelf with their research vessels. Now, what would be the end of the exploratory talks? Either to agree between us on start negotiations and agree on those negotiations, or agree on the terms under which we could go to The Hague. That would have been the perfect end of the exploratory talks and the negotiations after the exploratory talks. In me, I'm an optimist. I believe, I'm repeating myself now, that the differences we have with Turkey are differences we can solve, and differences we can solve now, not after 1 or 2 generations. And I'm afraid that Turkey is falling into a trap, an ideological trap, in pursuing these ideas of Mavi Vatan, blue homeland, green horses, etc., etc. The differences with Greece are differences that a modern, cosmopolitan, cosmic state can easily resolve. At least this is my humble opinion.
Thank you. There's a further question. The effectiveness of any country's foreign policy can depend on the degree of domestic consensus. And there's a question about what comments you would have on the position of the main opposition party, Syriza, here in Greece, and other opposition parties on relations with Turkey. To what extent do you see a consensus supporting your policy, and to what extent would you identify problems in the lack of consensus?
Well, I have to say that the Greek political establishment, in its huge majority, has arrived to a point of maturity. And I have to say that, of course, there are exceptions, but in the majority of issues, I'm quite content with the cooperation I'm getting from my colleagues from the majority of the parties of the opposition, Syriza included. And if you'll allow me to present you with an example, Syriza has voted for our agreement with Italy. Syriza just abstained in our agreement with Egypt. They didn't vote against. And Syriza has made favorable comments on our agreement with Albania. And Syriza was not against our MDCA agreement, the defense agreement, the mutual defense agreement with the United States. Of course, there is rhetoric that I can understand. We're in the Mediterranean, we're in Greece, we're not going to become Switzerland. But having said that, in the overall picture, I have to say openly and thankfully that the Greek political establishment have reached a point of maturity.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm conscious.
Well, that does not mean that I not wish for more, but sometimes you have to be quite happy with what we get.
I'm sure, a lesson for us all. Minister, I'm very conscious that we've asked you questions from A to Z. We've asked you many questions on such a wide range of issues. And we're indeed very grateful for you being willing to address each of these so directly and so honestly. And we appreciate that you face a number of challenges for foreign policy, and you've identified the strategy in terms of how Greece hopes to go forward. It would be a real pleasure if we could repeat this discussion at some point in the future to reflect on what progress has been made and what Greece might be able to expect in the future. But I think it would be great to have such a discussion. But I want to say thank you for this evening. Let me bring matters to a close. And before I finish, if I could just mention something for our audience. The next public event of the Hellenic Observatory will be with Professor Sir Christopher Pissaridis, joining a discussion on a new economic plan for Greece, what way forward? And on that panel, we will be joined by Professor Luca Katseli from the University of Athens and by Professor Michael Haliassos from the Goethe University in Frankfurt. So that would also be a very timely discussion about Greece and the way forward. But thank you for all of your questions. I'm sorry that I haven't been able to raise each of them, but thank you for joining us and thank you for your attention. But most of all, can I thank our LSE alumnus, who happens to be the Foreign Minister of Greece. And thank you, Minister, for joining us for such an extended discussion.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So I wish everyone good night from Athens, and I hope to see you at a future Hellenic Observatory event. Thank you very much indeed, and good night, or depending where you're watching, good morning.